The goal with Tesla was really to try to show that what electric cars can do, because people had the wrong impression. We had to change people's perception of an electric vehicle, because they used to think of it as something that was slow and ugly and had low range, kind of like a golf cart. So that's why we created the Tesla Roadster, to show that you can be fast, attractive, and long range. And it's amazing how, even though you can show that something works on paper, and the calculations are very clear, until you actually have the physical object and they can drive it, it doesn't really sink in for people. And so that I think is something worth noting. If you're going to create a company, the first thing you should try to do is create a working prototype.
And then the internet is also helpful because it's anything to do with software is a low capital endeavor. So I didn't have any money. I just had a bunch of student debt. But software you can just write, like by yourself. And you don't need a lot of atoms, like you don't need a lot of tooling and equipment, and so it's not capital intensive. So the ability to start a company, if it's software related, and it's the first company, is much, much easier.
Whatever area that you get into, given that even if you're the best of the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short.
Number 3, I'd say, is constantly seek criticism. A well thought out critique of whatever you're doing is as valuable as gold. And you should seek that from everyone you can, but particularly your friends. Usually your friends know what's wrong, but they don't want to tell you because they don't want to hurt you. So
lift you up, sort of.
Yeah. So they'll say, "Oh, I would encourage my friend, so I'm not going to tell him what I think is wrong with his product."
Yeah.
It doesn't mean your friends are right, but very often they are right, and you at least want to listen very carefully to what they say, and to everyone.
I think maybe it's helpful to say one of the things that was important then in the creation of PayPal was kind of how it started, because initially, the initial thought was with PayPal was to create an agglomeration of financial services, so to have one place where all of your financial services needs would be seamlessly integrated and work smoothly. And then we had like a little feature which was to do email payments. And whenever we'd show the system off to someone, we'd show the hard part, which was the agglomeration of financial services, which was quite difficult to put together. Nobody was interested. Then we'd show people email payments, which was actually quite easy, and everybody was interested. So this is, I think it's important to take feedback from your environment. You want to be as closed loop as possible. So we focused on email payments and really try to make that work, and that's what really got things to take off. But if we hadn't responded to what people said, then we probably would not have been successful. So it's important to look for things like that and focus on them when you see them, and correct your prior assumptions.
I try to get as much critical feedback as possible from friends, and you have to ask, but you have to coax it out of them, because they'll be reluctant to say it because they don't want to hurt you. But they know what's wrong with your product. But it is generally true that innovation comes from questioning the way things have been done before.
Yeah.
And if in the education system you're taught not to do that, that will inhibit entrepreneurship.
I think that's something you see in Silicon Valley, that there's no fear of failure. But culturally in this part of the world,
that's true. No, I think there's fear of failure. I certainly have fear of failure.
But it didn't stop you.
No.
Elon, can I ask you about that one message to that potential entrepreneur waiting to make the jump?
Well, certainly, I think people should ignore fear if it's irrational, but even if it's rational and the stake is worth it, it's still worth proceeding.
What are the range of probable outcomes? Outcomes are usually not deterministic. They're a range, and so you want to figure out what those probabilities are, and make sure
ideally that you're the house. You know, it's fine to take, it's fine to gamble as long as you're the house.
Yes.
But I do think that one great thing about Silicon Valley is failure is not a big stigma. So it's like if you try hard and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Like you can learn from that and do another company, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really one of the great things about Silicon Valley.
And then I think that the final thing I would encourage you to do is, now is the time to take risk. You don't have, you don't have kids. Your obligation. Well, sorry. Probably don't have kids. But as you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it.
So in order to have a great company, you've got to focus your energies on a particular area. Something that Steve Jobs was that I think was quite admirable was he was ultra product focused, like down to the little detail. He and the other people at Apple would really try hard to have these, both at a high level and a small level, these delightful things happen. So the product was just made you happy. What we aspire to do is to make the car so compelling that even with low gasoline prices, it's still the car you want to buy.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I can think of, that's the only sort of, not sure what else we could do, really.
You have to make it compelling.
Advice I'd give to people starting companies, to entrepreneurs in general, is really focus on making a product that your customers love. And it's so rare that you can buy a product and you love the product when you bought it. There are very few things that fit into that category. And if you can come up with something like that, your business will be successful for sure. I mean, as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, if they stay focused on that, then if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will.
All right, you have to focus on the customer and delivering for them.
Yeah, make sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher.
Yeah.
I think really an obsessive nature with respect to the quality of the product is very important. So being obsessive compulsive is a good thing in this context.
I'd say focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. So, for example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. I think that's the way to go. So, for any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts.
I think a lot of people think I must spend a lot of time with media or on businessy things, but actually almost all my time, like 80% of it is spent on engineering and design. So it's developing next generation product. That's 80% of it.
A lot of times, entrepreneur will come up with something which is only slightly better, and it can't just be slightly better. It's got to be a lot better. To make sure that whatever you're doing is a great product or service. It has to be really great. If you're a new company, I mean, unless it's like some new industry or new market if it's an untapped market, then you have more ability to. The standard is lower for your product or service. But if you're entering anything where there's an existing marketplace against large entrenched competitors, then your product or service needs to be much better than theirs. It can't be a little bit better, because then you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer and they say, why would you buy it as a consumer? You're always going to buy the trusted brand unless there's a big difference.
Well, I think that the most important thing for creating companies is you need a concentration of talent. You know, it's like creating a, you know, think of like a world sports team or something. You really want to focus your talent on a particular area, and that's what a company is. It's a group of people that got together to create a product or service, and then make sure that from a regulatory standpoint, and from its, you know, in terms of regulations and taxation and government support, that it's there for startup companies, and that it goes from startup all the way through the medium phase of the company. Because where most companies tend to not make it is not so much at that very beginning stage, it's that intermediate stage. So they'll, can they sort of reach escape velocity as a company? And when a new company is formed, and you're going up against established, you know, big established companies, you're trying to build some kind of credibility, and it's incredibly important that companies are nurtured through that phase. I mean, it's just like a little sapling growing in a redwood forest. You know, you've got these giant companies. If you don't get a little bit of sunlight and nutrition, it's game over.
There's a friend of mine who's got a great saying about creating a company. Trying to build a company and have it succeed is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Well, so, I mean, what tends to happen is it's sort of quite exciting for the first several months of starting a company. And then reality sets in, things don't go as well as planned, customers aren't signing up, the technology or the product isn't working as well as you thought. And then that can sometimes be compounded by a recession, and it can be very, very painful for several years. Frankly, starting a company, I would advise people to have a high pain tolerance.
Do you fear that maybe in this generation or the younger generation that they don't have that perseverance and grit to take on these really tough challenges?
I think some people do, and but no, I think it is definitely true that, I mean, maybe there are occasionally companies that get created where there's not an extended period of extreme pain, but I'm not aware of, you know, very many of such instances. So, but I do think that you know, new great entrepreneurs are born every day, and we'll continue to see amazing companies get built. But I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty.
You said that the most common hiring mistake was weighing too much on someone's talent and not on someone's personality. And then I think it matters whether someone has a good heart.
It does, yes, absolutely. So that's generally where, if I say where sort of the hiring mistakes that I've made in the past, it's been just as I said, it's looking too much at their intellectual capability alone, and not on how they affect those around them. What really matters is for someone's contribution to a company is how they are as an individual and how they affect others around them. I mean, you could say it's also analogous to a sports team. You know, if someone, the best person on the team is not necessarily the one who scores the most goals. It could be the person who assists in the most goals. And if somebody is, if there's one person on the team who's just wants the ball all the time and just wants to kick it at the goal, that can actually be detrimental. So it is important to weigh personality and just you know, are they going to be a good person, and will people like working with them and that kind of thing. It does make a difference.
If you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is,
and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company.
I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week. All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
Depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, like every waking hour. That's the thing I would say particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, you say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company.
Well, we don't think too much about what competitors are doing.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's important to be just focused on making the best possible products. It's sort of maybe analogous to what they say about if you're in a race.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what the other runners are doing.
Yeah.
Just run.
Yeah.
The goal of Tesla from the beginning has been to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport. So we actually did some partnerships. We did one with Mercedes and one with Toyota, and open source IP and everything. So the whole purpose of it was really to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport. So it's always great to hear when other car companies are making electric cars.
Why not?
I don't ever give up. I mean, I'd have to be dead or completely incapacitated. And one does have to be focused on the short term and money coming in when creating a company, because otherwise the company will die. So I think that a lot of times people think like creating a company is going to be fun. I would say it's not. It's really not that fun. I mean, there are periods of fun, and there are periods of where it's just awful. And particularly if you're the CEO of the company, you actually have a distillation of all the worst problems in the company. There's no point in spending your time on things that are going right. So you only spend your time on things that are going wrong. And there are things that are going wrong that other people can't take care of. So you have like the worst. You have a filter for the crappiest problem in the company. The most pernicious and painful problem. So I wouldn't say I think you have to feel quite compelled to do it. And have a fairly high pain threshold. And there's a friend of mine who says like starting a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. There's some truth to that. The staring into the abyss part is that you're going to be constantly facing the extermination of the company. Because most startups fail. It's like 90%, arguably 99% of startups fail. So that's the staring into the abyss part. You're constantly saying, okay, if I don't get this right, the company will die. And then the eating glass part is you've got to do the problems. You've got to work on the problems that the company needs you to work on, not the problems you want to work on. And so that's you end up working on problems that you'd really wish you weren't working on. And so that's the eating glass part.
and that goes on for a long time.
I mean, maybe there are occasionally companies that get created where there's not an extended period of extreme pain, but I'm not aware of very many of such instances. I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty.
Yeah.
I'd say starting a business is not for everyone. Generally, starting a business, I'd say number one is have a high pain threshold. That's it. There's a friend of mine who's got a good saying, which is that starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. That's generally what happens, because when you first start a company, there's lots of optimism and things are great, and then so happiness at first is high. Then you encounter all sorts of issues, and happiness will steadily decline, and then you'll go through a whole world of hurt. And then eventually, if you succeed, and in most cases you will not succeed, and Tesla almost didn't succeed, came very close to failure. Then if you succeed, then after a long time, you will finally get back to happiness.
I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment, because people tend to, a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. Whatever this thing is that you're trying to create, what would be the utility delta compared to the current state of the art times how many people it would affect? So that's why I think having something that makes a big difference but affects a sort of small to moderate number of people is great, as is something that makes even a small difference but affects a vast number of people. Like the area under the curve. Yeah, exactly. The area under the curve would actually be roughly similar for those two things.
I think having a purpose certainly is going to attract the very best talent in the world, because if people can, if there's something that's intrinsically enjoyable and the financial rewards are good, but then also it's something that's going to genuinely change the world, then I think that's a pretty powerful motivator. But I don't think like everything needs to change the world, I mean, honestly, like there's lots of like useful things that people do, and I mean, I think really it should be like a usefulness optimization. Like just say like, is what I'm doing as useful as it could be?
You're talking about the goal of an organization or a
goal in general, yeah. And just even if something isn't changing the world, if it's making people's lives better, I think that's great. And even if something's like making only people's lives only slightly better, but it's a large number of people, then kind of like the area under the curve is quite good.
So is that mathematical first principles of point utility and numbers?
Exactly.
The integral. Yeah. Okay.
Like I mean, sort of like one could say is like some app really making people's lives better? If it's affecting a lot of people, even in a small way, then yeah, the sort of area is good.
So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with profit. In fact, profit just means that people are paying you more for whatever you're doing than you're spending to create it. That's a good thing. and if that's not the case, then you'll be out of business, and rightfully so.